Hello, good day. This is Joe Aguas, and this is part of my lectures in philosophy. For this lecture, I will be discussing about the arguments against religion and against the existence of God. This is still part of my lectures in philosophy of religion. In my other lectures, I have discussed the arguments for God's existence. But of course, there's always a contrary argument for God's existence, meaning to say, there are also philosophers or philosophical schools that argue against the existence of God and argue against religion. And in this presentation, in this lecture, I will be focusing on the different arguments against God's existence and against religion. So, just a very brief introduction. Let's discuss atheism. Atheism is that position that argues against God's existence. So, atheism is an argument or a denial of God as a supreme being, and not only God as supreme being, it's also a denial of the spiritual realm, meaning to say, atheists do not believe in anything that is spiritual or any divine being or a supreme divine being or life after death for example. So atheism can be understood either in its broad sense or narrow sense. In its broad sense, atheism is the denial of the spiritual reality or the supernatural realm, meaning to say no gods, no spirit, no life after death, no divine beings, etc. In the narrow sense, it's only the denial of God as a supreme being, as a personal being, as a personal supreme being, a creator who influences human experience um, and who experiences or influences human action. So here, the denial of God's existence does not include the denial of a religious experience. When we say religious experience, it could be explained in terms of naturalism, humanism, sociology, and psychology. Meaning to say, atheists or those who believe or do not believe in God, they do not deny that we have some religious experience, but they explain religious experience in terms of humanism. In other words, well, it's just a natural feeling to have this kind of feeling that there is a supreme being or that they communicate with a supreme being. But it does not mean that there is, in fact, a supreme being. Okay? Or psychology could explain it is, well, it's just a kind of, a psychological, say, a mental product, uh, a product of the mind, an imagined reality. That explains why we have a religious experience. But it does not mean that there is, in fact, something divine, something supernatural. Okay? So, atheism does not discount religious experience. They recognize that we have a religious experience or people experience religion, but they explain it in terms of science or in terms of human psychology or sociology. Okay. And those are some of the things we are going to discuss in this presentation. Now, let's go to the next point, naturalistic interpretation of religion. The intelligent agnostic or the atheist does not deny that a religious person has had certain experiences because of which he has become convinced about the existence of God. Okay, so they do not say, you don't have this religious experience, that there are no religious people. They don't deny that. There are, in fact, religious people, religious persons who claim that they have certain religious experiences. However, the agnostic or the atheist believes that these experiences can be adequately explained or accounted for by adopting a naturalistic or sociological interpretation of religion without postulating a God. In other words, while the religious person claims that there is a God and that he has some experience about the divine or the supernatural, these experiences can be explained through sociology, through science, or through psychology. So, the belief and experience about some religious thing can be explained in terms of psychology, which is a mere maybe a psychological or a subjective event or a mental event without admitting the existence of a divine being. In other words, the belief, the experience in a divine being is purely a psychological event or a subjective event. Now, naturalism is based on an ancient Greek atomist, the Greek ancient atomist, Malkutus, for example, who believed that the natural world, the universe, the stars, the planets, and other celestial bodies, the earth, and all that is in the universe, right, is all that exists. In other words, there's no such thing as extra worldly. There's no an world other than this world. Okay, so the cosmos is all that is. The cosmos is all that was, all that is, and all that will be. Okay, now naturalism is closely related to materialism, and materialism holds that only the material, meaning the physical, is real. Only those things that are concrete, only those things that are physical, we can, experience, perceive. That's all that exists. Beyond our perceptions, beyond the physical things, beyond the material things, nothing. So it follows that a naturalist is also a materialist, right? For both, the world is of nature forms a single sphere without reference from the outside. Like outside of this world, there are souls or spirits, or that outside of this physical material world, there is anything divine or spiritual. Materialism and naturalism are therefore intrinsically atheistic, meaning, in the broad sense, they don't believe in anything that is spiritual, anything that's supernatural or divine. For the materialist, the universe is a self contained and closed system of cause and effect. Everything here, because of the physical laws, can be explained within this realm of causality. It does not have any overarching telos outside of this, finite physical world, except its own laws. And it is not open to intervention from the outside, from a spiritual being. Okay? Since there's no outside realm or dimension other than this world. According to Richard Dawkins, and I quote, an atheist, in the sense of a philosophical naturalist, is somebody who believes that there is nothing beyond the natural physical world, no supernatural creative intelligence lurking behind the observable universe. End of quote. Now, since naturalists hold that the universe is a closed system of cause and effect, then most of them are also determinists. In other words, causality determines everything. Okay? If you understand the cause, then you will know what could be the effect. Or if you understand the effect, then you can trace it back to what is its natural or physical causes. According to Stephen Hawking, and I quote him, It is hard to see how free will can operate if our behavior is determined by physical laws. So it seems we are no more than biological machines and that free will is just an illusion. End of quote. So for the naturalist, there is no supernatural God who created the universe in its part or apart from it and intervenes in its process. Miracles, like for example, those recorded in the scriptures, are impossible. There's no transcendence. Therefore, moral values are purely a human creation. Moral values derive their source from human experience. Consequently, ethics should be understood as an autonomous institutional and does not need any theological sanction. Now let's move on to the next topic. This is the following topics will be about the different theories or the different arguments against God's existence or against religion. These are arguments that explain why there is a religion, not from a theological perspective. So one thing common among these different theories is that while they explain why there is a religion, they don't explain this in terms of affirming God's existence. So um, they say that there is religion, but they try to explain this phenomenon of religion in terms of psychology or sociology or naturalism. So the first here is Emil Durkheim's theory about the about religion, the sociological basis of religion. Durkheim viewed God just as an imaginary being produced by society in order to manipulate or control the members of that society. So for Durkheim, if there is a concept of God, that concept of God or that God is just a mythical being. God is just a symbol of society. So the encompassing human group, a society, exercises the attributes of the deity in relation to its members and gives rise to the idea of a God in their minds. Durkheim suggested that the God or gods whom people worship are just imaginary beings unconsciously fabricated by society as instruments whereby the society can exercise over the individual's thoughts, behavior. In other words, um, God is a creation of society. It's a creation of society, and the reason to create this concept of God, this being of God, is for the society to control the members' thought and behavior. So, in a sense, for Durkheim, God is not really a supernatural supreme being, but rather a symbol of the society. So, we can equate God with society. God did not create man, and then man bound bind themselves together to form a society. Rather, it is a society, the society that created God. So God is a product, a creation of society. Now, the reality of a higher power that transcends man's personal life and impresses its will as a moral imperative is not a supernatural being, but actually a natural fact of society. In Durkheim's structural functional perspective, he considered society to be one body composed of different parts. Now, for that body, for that society to be functional, each of these parts, meaning the members of that society, should perform their respective tasks. When members of the society deviate from their task, if they don't follow or perform their respective task, then the result is a dysfunctional society. There is a dysfunction in society. So it's important to avoid that situation where the society becomes dysfunctional. And in order to do this, in order to bind the members to, to make the members uh, perform their specific tasks, they found a solution, or they found means to encourage people, the members, to perform their tasks. And this means, this answer to this need to bind members together to perform their tasks is religion. So it's religion that binds the members together to perform their task, their respective tasks, and make the society functional. So in every religion, there is always a moral code. There are always laws that people should follow. And religion provides the people with a sense of morality, with that moral sense to follow the rules. So it tells people what is right and what is wrong, what people can do, what people cannot do. So when people have one religion, then because of their loyalty to their religion, then they will follow these moral codes, then they will follow their responsibilities, and they will perform their tasks. So for Durkheim, this is a means of acquiring loyalty from the members of the society. He believed that this is essential for the stability of society. So society created religion so that the members will be functional. They will perform their tasks, and performing the tasks will, result to functionality and stability of the society. Now, Durkheim explains that religious experiences are also social experiences because when we experience, for example, say we people worship, okay, people pray, but praying for Durkheim is a social activity. People pray together, so it's a social experience. And states that the feeling of holiness and of God results from human relations, from human interaction. An individual naturally feels secure when he is in a group, when he is, when he prays together with a group. So he is somewhat comforted, given the fact that there is someone who can, turn to, meaning the group. He can turn to the group whenever he has problems or are crises in life that arise. So the church it becomes meaningful when there are people inside it. So the feeling of sacredness uh, differs though when individual finds himself alone in the church. So if a person, if an individual member of a society finds himself alone, then he is not comforted. He's more comforted when there are people, oh, with whom together he prays with, right? So uh, that feeling of sacredness is felt more deeply when it's done, when there is a common religious activity or practice. So people, they are comforted when they are in a group setting, when they are in a congregation, when they are with people of the same faith. So the key to the complementary sense of God as people's final hope and security is found in how individuals are carried and supported by all the major crises in their lives, by the society or by the congregation or by the religion to which they belong. Now, of course, there are some criticisms against this sociological theory of religion. First, it cannot account for monotheistic religions, which teaches that God loves all humanity, that love extends beyond the congregation or beyond the society. Meaning, love is not only within the community or the congregation or the society, it also extends to other people of faith or to the people of other faiths. Okay? So, for example, in Christianity or in Catholicism, for example, the commandment to love is not only, or it's not only applied to fellow Catholics or to the members of your church. The commandment to love extends to all people, even to those people who are outside your faith or who are not members of your faith or of your congregation or church. So, if it's true, as the sociological theory claims, that you know people should only be within confined within the social group, the society, or the congregation or the church, how come that other religions, like for example, Christianity or Catholicism to be specific, teaches that we should love our neighbor regardless whether he belongs to our faith or belongs to a different faith. So this theory fails to account for the universal reach of the religiously informed conscience. There are things that go beyond the boundaries of any society. For example, moral obligations are spread worldwide. No? So, for example, the moral obligation to help, for example, in times of need, extends to all, not just to the members of your particular religion or society. So, if religion is just a product of society, then how would anybody explain such universal phenomenon where everybody, even though everybody help people who are outside of their faith or outside of their religion? Next, it cannot account for the moral creativity of the prophetic mind, meaning uh, there are individuals who go beyond their ethical codes, right? So the prophetic mind is able to transcend what is taught in the society. As I've said, in a particular society, there are moral codes, moral laws, or precepts that tell people to do this and do that, specific to that particular religion. However, there are also individuals who go beyond the established ethical codes of their society. They are more morally advanced than other people. So if that is the case, where did they get these ideas? So meaning they get the ideas from outside of their society. It can also explain the socially detaching power of the conscience. There are those people whom we call nonconformists. They just don't follow, meaning, yes, there are established moral principles, moral codes in one's group, but they don't, some people don't conform to these moral codes. No, of course, it's not that they don't follow, they follow, but if they can go beyond. If for example, in the case of Jesus, for example, um, during his time, there is a kind of a divide or mistrust between the Jews and the Samaritans, or the people in Samaria. But during his time, Jesus helped the Samaritan woman, no, the woman who was drawing water from the well. So here, Jesus stands, but does not conform to the moral codes of the Jewish moral codes. During Sabbath, they should not do work during Sabbath, but Jesus performed miracles even during the Sabbath days. So there are people who are, follow a different beat of the drums. In other words, they don't just follow what the society or what their moral codes dictates. They go beyond this. So, question here is, if the sociological theory is true, then what accounts for the prophetic mind, for the creative conscience, for people, for individuals who follow or marches to a different drum, no? Or to the universality of conscience. Okay. Now let's move on to the next theory, and this is Sigmund Freud's theory about religion, and he considered religion to be an obsessional neurosis. So Sigmund Freud is a psychologist. He is one of the proponents or of psychoanalysis. Um, Freud says that we have our own basic desires. We have um, our our desires and wishes and intentions. And the most basic, the strongest of these are the desires of the id, or the biological desires. Okay. Now, how does he explain religion? What is the role of religion to our basic desires? According to Freud, all religions are nothing but illusions. Okay, nothing but illusions. In other words, these are just uh, again, these are just uh, product of human imagination. These are just human inventions. Now, Freud claims that because human beings live in society, they are forced to control themselves by repressing their desires. Okay? So one must repress his or her desires so as not to act on all of them. Meaning, because we are not just individuals, because we live in society. There are desires, there are wants that need to be suppressed or repressed. One cannot just do what he pleases. No, one cannot just take whatever he wants. One of the basic desires is sexual gratification. Well, because we live in a say society, then the expression or the gratification of sexual desires must be regulated, some extent must be suppressed. Now, the suppression of these desires results in frustration and pain because these are basic, these are strong, these are very strong, insistent wishes. Once we suppress them, they result of frustration and pain. Now, in order to alleviate this frustration and pain, man invented the gods, which later on became God. They invented these gods, these beings, religion in general, because the gods will compensate people for their troubles in the next life. In other words, because we have we people become frustrated, they cannot express their desires. They have suppressed them. But religion promises that it's okay not to satisfy those wishes, those desires. Because come to think of it, in the next life, you will be rewarded because of your frustrations. So you will be blessed in heaven, blessed in the next life. So religion is like a compensatory mechanism where people are rewarded, compensated for the frustrations and pains in the suppressions of their desire. Now, another point of Freud is that religion is an obsessional neurosis of society. It is like a mental defense against calamities and the other forces of nature. Men feel themselves to be powerless, to be defenseless, to be helpless against the forces of nature. Okay? So they cannot defend themselves against the force of nature, against calamities. They need somebody who will protect them, who will defend them, who will help them in their helplessness, some kind of a support, some kind of a protection. For Freud, people are like children. In the face of, just like a child, the children or a child is so defenseless against things that they cannot control. So they depend on their parents. Children are afraid, they are dependent, they are helpless. So they depend on their parents. Their parents protect them, care for them, help them, and so on. Later, this parent-child relationship turned into a wider application. People in their infancy rather, imagine a cosmic parent who would care for them. So that is the function of religion, to invent some kind of a parent who will protect them. Okay, so who will who will care for them. So first, in the primitive societies, these are just like gods. No, so they offer sacrifice to these gods to protect them. No, against the force of nature. If there is typhoon, now they have to pray to these gods to protect them from typhoon, earthquake, and other calamities. And then later on in the history of mankind, this belief in many gods transformed into a belief in a single God, a heavenly Father who will protect them. Okay? So religion therefore emerged from man's infantile helplessness. Man is so helpless as an infant that he created this image of a father who will protect them against forces, against forces that they cannot overcome. Okay? So for Freud, belief in God is an illusion. It's a product of wishful fulfillment, of a wish fulfillment, wishful thinking. Not because there is really a God, because we cannot really prove or disprove that there is a God. But it's just a wishful thinking that, you wish there is somebody to help you, to care for you, to protect you, because you are so helpless against many forces, the natural forces. So the concept of religion answers the riddles of our time. Religious beliefs are unverifiable, but there is always a scientific explanation which is valid, which explains why there is a religion. So this, for Freud, explains why there is a religion. This is a scientific explanation why there is a religion. It does not support the idea that there's really a God, but it tries to explain why is there a religion? Why did people invent this religion? Okay. Now, on the basis of this, we can assume that Freud's uh, interpretation of religion follows the naturalist model or the naturalist context. Uh, and his positions are always prejudiced against belief, no? Again, belief in the supernatural religion and God. Any religion or any religious experience is prejudged as just an illusion. And assume that the religious believer never really experienced God or the supernatural. Rather, he or she is just experiencing a natural phenomenon or object pretending to be natural. But there is a problem with the position or explanation or theory of Freud because he merely focused on the monotheistic religions, especially Christianity. Okay. In Christianity, we pray to this divine being for protection and so on. But other religions do not have that kind of relationship to a personal God. Like, for example, in Confucianism and in Taoism, even in Buddhism, for example, there's no concept of a personal God whom we pray to. Well, in Confucianism or in Chinese philosophy, we have a concept of heaven, right? The ancestors, the deities. But it's not because it's not the same as in the case of um, Christianity or the monotheistic religions. So, how does Freud account for the other religions like like Confucianism, like Buddhism, like Taoism? Because he tried to explain religion, but that religion is Christianity. Okay, so meaning his concept of religion as obsessional neurosis does not apply to the other religions, especially to the non-monotheistic religion, no? The non-monotheistic religions like Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Okay. Now let's go to the next philosophy here. Ludwig Feuerbach, religion as an illusion. So very somehow similar to the other concepts that we have already discussed. Again, religion is but just an illusion. So Feuerbach does not argue that there is really an uh, su- supreme spiritual divine being. No such thing. But he tries to explain how come we have this belief, how come we have this religion. So he explains religion simply as, again, another illusion or a figment of human imagination. Now, he starts by saying that in our sensational impression or in our perception, there is always that relationship between object and subject. The subject is man, the one who perceives. And the object is the thing that he perceives. Okay? So there is always the duality between the subject, who is the perceiver, and the object that is perceived. Okay? So man is the subject, and the thing, the external thing, is the object, the thing that is perceived. Now, according to Feuerbach, this object subject relationship can also be applied to religious experience, meaning to an object that we consider to be religious, like, for example, in the case of God. In the perception of the senses, the normal, sense perception, the consciousness of the object, meaning if I'm conscious of this laptop, for example, that is distinguishable from the consciousness of the self. So I am conscious both of the object of my perception, this laptop, for example, and me. I am conscious of myself as a separate subject. But in religion, both of them correspond to each other. In other words, when you talk of object in sense perception, the object is outside of man, outside of myself. But in the case of religious object, that object is within me. In other words, it is not outside of me. It is inside me. It is close to me. For example, according to St. Augustine, God is nearer, more related to us, and therefore more easily known by us than sensible material things, because the sensible material things are outside of us, but God as a being is within us, inside us. Okay? So the object of sense perception is indifferent. It is independent of our dispositions, but the object of religion is an object that is selected by us. God is not just any random being outside the world. No, like for example, I can perceive many things around me, but when I recognize or when I perceive God, when I become conscious of God, that God is a preferred being, one and only. Okay? So it essentially presupposes a critical judgment. There's already discrimination between the divine and the non-divine, between that which is worthy of adoration and that which is not. The external objects around me are not worthy of adoration. But this God that I consider to be my object of adoration is within me. So there's already a preference, according to Feuerbach, preference for his being inside me. Okay? But here is the critical thing about this theory of Ludwig Feuerbach. The object of any subject, I'm talking about the God, is nothing else than the subject's own nature taken objectively. Meaning, when God is the object of my consciousness, of my knowledge, of my perception, he is nothing but my own image. He's nothing but my own nature, taken objectively. So imagine a being that is separate from me, but in fact, that being is nothing but a projection of myself. Only that this being is a more purified form. So for Feuerbach, the consciousness of God is actually a consciousness of oneself. The knowledge of God is actually the knowledge of oneself. God is nothing but a manifestation of the nature of man. He is an expression of the self of man. Okay? So God as a being, as an object of perception, is nothing but a projection of myself. Right? So religion here becomes the unveiling of man's hidden treasures, and the revelation of his most intimate thought. But question is here is, what is this intimate thought of man? What is these thoughts of man about himself that he projects to a spiritual or divine being? Now, he's pertaining here to the Christian idea of God. Christianity is man's relation to his nature. The divine being is nothing more than the purified version freed from the limits of the common man. You see, I project, so this being that I consider to be divine, I consider to be God, is a projection of myself. Okay? It's a projection of myself. So, all the attributes, all the divine attributes are nothing but attributes of man. Okay? But according to the Christians, the predicates given to the subject are not related to the subject because God is unknowable. Meaning God is unknowable. Meaning God, this being, the divine, is beyond us. Okay? He is beyond us, but being beyond us, meaning to say we cannot really know what its predicate. What are the qualities, attributes of this God? But that is impossible according to uh, Feuerbach, because meaning if we deny that God has attributes, how can we know this God? But the Christians claim that he knows this God. So it's a contradictory, no? It would be a contradictory to say, as a Christian saying, that this God is unknowable. It is, in fact, according to Feuerbach, it is actually knowable because we know the predicates we attributed to God. Those are our attributes. Those are our qualities. Okay? So this God appears to us as the projection of our nature. Only that this time, this God is a purified version of ourselves. If we see ourselves to be helpless, this God is powerful. If we are powerless, he is powerful. If we are finite, he is infinite. All the superlatives of human nature, we attribute to God, to this imaginary being. Okay, to this imaginary being. So, this concept of God as a projection of human qualities in its pure form, in its purest form, is nothing but a kind of anthropomorphism. Okay? It's a kind of anthropomorphism. It's a projection of the human mind. But the question is, why do we have to project this God as powerful, absolute, perfect, etc.? Well, because according to Feuerbach, again, we feel ourselves to be helpless, powerless. So we have to project a God. So God becomes, again, an illusion. God becomes a safety net. Christianity invented this God to be some kind of a safety net. If we are helpless, if we are in a crisis, if we are in a problem, there is a God who will help us. So it fulfills our desire for protection, for comfort. So it satisfies this feeling of need, this feeling of lack on our part. We are powerless, or our powers are limited, but there's a God who is powerful. Sometimes we are helpless, but there is a God who will help us. So, for Feuerbach, religion is an anthropomorphism. It's a collection of human attributes that we projected to God and then glorify this God. Man has given God all the positive qualities, and as a result, man has alienated himself from himself. All the attributes, the divine attributes, are attributes of human nature. So the human nature, God, is nothing but the human nature purified. It's a consciousness of God. This consciousness of God is a consciousness of ourselves. So the consequence of that anthropomorphism is self-alienation. And therefore, according to Feuerbach, we have to transcend, we have to outgrow this alienation and religion and reclaim our nature, from this imagination, no, from this human invention, from this illusion. Well, there are some objections to Feuerbach's theory. First, if an infinite divine being really exists, then it will be beyond human understanding. And it is natural for humans to attempt to describe it by drawing from their own experiences. According to John Hick, God may be described or imagined in different and even contradictory ways in different societies. These are just finite human attempts to describe the indescribable. But these descriptions are not illusions. They are not product of human imagination. Okay? Because if it's just a product of human imagination, human imagination can have several forms, can take different forms. And the projection of God, the description of God is different from different religions. The gods in Hinduism, for example, is different from Christianity or from the monotheistic religions. And again, Feuerbach, just like Freud, he criticized Christianity. But his criticism may be applied to Christianity, but it cannot be applied to the other religions. Okay? And even if you think about the monotheistic religions, for example, in monotheism or in theism, there are arguments for God's existence, cosmological argument, teleological argument, ontological argument, causal argument. They are from they are far from being just products of human imagination. These are products of you know human reason, not just imagination. Those are the different arguments against God's existence and against religion, especially Christianity, or monotheistic religions, especially Christianity. Okay? Again, these arguments does not say that there are no religions, that there are no belief in a God, but they try to explain why there is such a belief in God or gods, or and why there is the phenomenon of religion. And they try to explain this in terms of naturalism, in terms of psychology, in terms of sociology, to account for the phenomenon of religion. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something from these lectures and this lecture and presentations. Good day.